I never thought the land could vanish without warning. That morning changed everything forever. The letter arrived with an official seal. It had a weight that felt wrong in my hands. I sat at the kitchen table. A cup of coffee was still steaming. Beside me. I opened it with careless ease. I thought it was ordinary mail. But there was nothing ordinary inside that envelope. 1,200 acres of my family land were gone. Sold away for $50,000. Without my signature. Without my knowledge. Without a chance to fight. It felt like someone reached into my chest. They pulled out a part of me I could never replace. My grandfather had cleared those fields. With his own hands, he cut down trees, he hauled stones, he turned wild ground into something worth keeping. He always told me, "This land is freedom. Do not let anyone take it from you," and yet in my hands were papers that said it no longer belonged to me. The words were sharp like blades. I read them again and again. I could not understand. Transferred to Pinarest Development Corporation. Transferred. By the HOA, the letters formed a world that should not exist. How could land worked for 3 generations simply vanish into a corporation I had never heard of? I stood by the kitchen window. I looked out over the wide fields, the fences, the barns, everything that carried the weight of my family history. The morning sun made the acres glow golden and alive. The paper in my hands declared it was no longer mine. Nothing about it made sense. I had paid every tax. I had cleared every fee. I had fulfilled every obligation. I walked the fields slowly that day. I searched for some mistake. For some reason, that might explain how a $2 million property could be stripped away. The soil beneath my boots felt steady. My world was crumbling. The document spoke of special assessments. That phrase clung to me like smoke. I had never seen such words on any bill before. Special assessments without warning, without notice, without a chance to answer. Fraud hidden behind official ink. When I called Catherine Sterling, the HOA president, her voice came polished and cold. "Mr. Walker," she said, "sometimes ownership involves complex obligations. Complex obligations." Those were her words. I told her I had receipts. Every payment cleared, every duty met. She brushed it away as if I were a child. She acted like I misunderstood adult matters. She claimed procedures were followed, legal channels respected, as though legality meant justice, as though ink on a page outweighed the sweat of a lifetime. But I could hear it in her tone. The calculation, beneath the smooth, rehearsed calm. She was not surprised. She was not confused. She was ready. That was the first moment I understood. This was no accident. The land had been targeted. I hung up the phone. I sat in silence for a long time. I stared at the papers spread across my table. The language was too neat, too precise to be mere error. Phrases like strategic land use optimization. Phrases no farmer would ever hear from a tax office. This was designed. Someone had reached deep into the law. They bent it like wire until it wrapped around my family land and pulled it away. I felt the anger rise in me. But it was fear, too. Because what kind of power could move so quietly and so completely? I called Ben Martinez. He had spent decades fighting property disputes. When I told him what happened, the pause in his voice carried more weight than words. "This is not just a tax mistake, Timber. This is bigger." He showed me files stacked high, cases where families had lost land to the same company. They used the same tactics, special assessments, hidden notices, expedited auctions. The pattern was clear. People never knew until the surveyors showed up. Until the bulldozers came rolling across their fields. I listened as he explained. Corporations used complexity as a weapon. They moved faster than families could respond. They used the law as a mask for theft. And I thought of my grandfather. His calloused hands. He built fences stone by stone under a burning sun. Was all that labor now nothing more than a line on a contract? I walked into town the next day. I spoke with neighbors. Dorothy Hayes told me how they almost took her land, too. Her voice shook as she laid out clippings of families torn apart by the same scheme. The Martinez family lost 80 acres overnight. The surveyors had shown up before. The letter even reached their mailbox. Every story followed the same design. Notices sent to wrong addresses. Deadlines shortened so no one could fight. Auctions held in silence. Owners never knew their property was on the block. It was never coincidence. It was planned. I started keeping records, just as my grandfather once kept ledgers of crop yields and rainfall. Every phone call, every document, every whispered warning from neighbors. My dining table turned into a battlefield of paper, maps, files, timelines, all pointing to the same truth. Pinarest Development had taken 3,000 acres across the county in just 18 months, worth $15 million. They had built a machine that ate land, family by family, farm by farm, and Catherine Sterling was their smiling face, in every meeting, in every hearing, on every signature. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. She was not just a president of some neighborhood association. She was a gatekeeper of secrets, a dealer of information, sitting on review boards across counties, with access to plans. Before anyone else, she knew which land would rise in value. She knew which families would struggle with taxes. She knew which plots could be snatched before anyone could blink. She sold that knowledge piece by piece. Entire communities were bleeding. That night, I sat alone in the dark house. The clock ticked on the wall. My hands were trembling. My resolve grew hard. This was not just my fight. This was a war against families. Families who built their lives from dirt and sweat. Families who saw everything stolen by paper and ink. And as much as they wanted me to believe I was powerless, I knew one truth that steadied me. When thieves hide behind law, the only weapon strong enough is truth itself. I swore. I would not let them bury my grandfather's legacy under their fraud. I would drag their secrets into the light, even if it broke me. Everyone saw the smoke rising over the courthouse that morning. It was not fire. It was anger. It was fear. It was the storm that had been building in silence, and I was standing right in the center of it. Ben told me the truth. Pinarest Development had perfected a playbook. They disguised theft as law. They took acres as if they were nothing more than numbers on a page. 3,000 acres already gone. Families scattered, generations cut off from their legacy. And now my 1,200 acres were next in line. I walked the streets of town with files in my hands. Neighbors stopped me. They whispered. They warned. Their eyes carried the same weight mine did. They knew what had happened to others. They feared what would happen to them. But they also hoped. Maybe someone would finally fight back. At night, I studied every line of every document. The language was cold. It was deliberate. Special assessments. Strategic development. Community. Priorities. All of it sounded official. All of it smelled like fraud. I stared at Catherine Sterling's name. It appeared again and again. Not only in my papers, in the files of other families too. She was there when the Martinez family lost their land. She was there when surveyors walked through Dorothy Hayes' fields. She was the smiling face of a machine that was grinding families into dust. The more I uncovered, the more I noticed shadows. A car parked across from my house, the same man in the diner every time I met Ben. A dark sedan following me from the courthouse to the grocery store. At first, I thought it was in my head. But then I saw him write something in a small notebook. And I knew. I was being watched. Fear clawed at me. My sleep broke into pieces. Every noise outside felt like a threat. Every phone call carried strange delays and echoes. My computer flooded with odd emails from companies I never contacted. They wanted me to feel hunted. They wanted me to stop. But instead of stopping, I pressed harder. I dug into the courthouse archives. I dug into old records no one cared to read. I found a folder under my father's old desk. Inside were letters. Letters that revealed talks about land seizures going back decades. Letters between officials and developers, planning, coordinating, waiting for the right moment. It was not coincidence. It was not a mistake. It was conspiracy. It was theft disguised as law. One night I came home and the door was wide open. My heart dropped as I stepped inside. Nothing was stolen. At least nothing of value to thieves. But everything of value to me was destroyed. My grandfather's photographs ripped apart. His letters shredded. His keepsakes broken. It was not robbery. It was a message. They wanted me to know they could reach into my home. They wanted me to know they could destroy not just my land, but my history. They wanted me to feel helpless. I stood in the wreckage of my living room. I felt the anger rise, until it drowned out the fear. They had made it personal. And that was their mistake. The police came. They looked around. They wrote their report. They told me to install cameras. They told me to lock my doors tighter. But they did not see what I saw. They did not feel what I felt. This was not kids or vandals. This was war. I told Ben what happened. He frowned. He warned me. These people do not play fair. They will push. They will watch. They will break what you love. And if you push too hard, they will break you. But his warning did not scare me. It hardened me. Because the break-in proved something. I was close. Too close. And they knew it. The next day, Dorothy Hayes gave me more than just clippings. She gave me a list of families who had been taken apart just like mine. Every name carried a story. Every story carried pain. And at the bottom of the list was a signature. Catherine Sterling. She was not just hiding behind procedure. She was profiting. She was using her place in the HOA as a shield. Behind that shield, she was handing over land to Pinterest Development for money, for power, for herself. I tracked her history. She had worked in other states, always in development, always in community boards, always close to officials who made decisions about zoning and land. She was no amateur. She was a professional predator. The deeper I went, the heavier the risk became. Files went missing from courthouse shelves. Calls came in with no voice on. The other end. My internet crashed whenever I searched for her name. And every time I left my driveway, the same car appeared 2 streets over. But fear was no longer enough to stop me. Because in the ruins of my grandfather's letters, I saw a truth. They could break pictures. They could break wood. But they could not break resolve. I started preparing for the HOA meeting. I gathered everything: files, letters, records, photographs of notices taped to wrong doors, testimonies of families who never received a warning until bulldozers arrived. My dining room table became a war table. Every paper a weapon. Every fact a bullet. I was ready to face Catherine Sterling in the one place she believed she was untouchable. Her HOA meeting. The night before the meeting, I walked my fields. The air was cold. The stars stretched above me. I thought of my grandfather. I thought of his words. This land is freedom. Do not let anyone take it from you. And I swore, tomorrow, I will not whisper. Tomorrow, I will not tremble. Tomorrow, I will stand in front of the people and I will show them the truth. The night was silent. The land stood strong, and so did I. Everyone in the community room turned when I walked in. More than 100 people filled the chairs, more than had ever come to a meeting before. The air was heavy. Whispers moved through the crowd. Papers shuffled. Eyes locked on me, and then on her. Catherine Sterling stood at the front. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect mask. She welcomed everyone with practiced charm. She spoke of progress, of community values, of development opportunities. Her words rolled off her tongue like a script, but I saw it. The steel behind her eyes, the calculation behind her calm. She was not here to lead. She was here to protect her empire. When she called for questions, I stood. My voice cut the room in half. I laid the first file on the table, a copy of the letter that stole my land. I read the words aloud. Special assessments, immediate seizure, transfer to Pinarest Development. Faces in the crowd tightened, murmurs rose. Then I laid the second file, the Martinez case. 80 acres gone, no notice, no chance, no return. Gasps broke through the silence. I felt the shift, the weight turning against her. One by one, I laid out the evidence. Records of auctions held in secret, notices sent to wrong addresses, families who found bulldozers at dawn instead of letters in the mail. Every page carried her name. Every page tied her to Pinarest. Every page tore her mask a little more. She smiled still, but it was thinner now. Her voice sharpened when she interrupted. She said these were isolated cases. She said procedures were followed. She said owners were irresponsible. But the crowd was no longer nodding. They were staring. They were whispering. They were doubting. Then I dropped the final piece. A copy of financial records. Money moving from Pinarest to accounts tied to her. Payments labeled as consulting fees. But the dates matched the land seizures, and the amounts matched the losses of families in this room. Gasps turned into outrage. Whispers turned into shouts. People demanded answers. She tried to speak over them, but the tide was moving. And it was moving against her. Her smile vanished. Her eyes hardened. She leaned close to the microphone. And she said it. You do not know who you are messing with, Mr. Walker. You are playing a dangerous game, and you are about to lose everything. So, room froze. Silence cut deep. Her words were not denial. They were threat. The crowd saw it. They heard it, and the spell broke. Voices rose. People shouted for her resignation. Others demanded investigation. Some begged for police. The order of the meeting shattered into chaos. And in the center of that storm, she glared at me. Cold, ruthless, promising war. I left the meeting knowing one truth. She was not alone. She had power behind her, lawyers, politicians, money. She had built an army of paper and influence, and she had just declared war on me. Ben was waiting outside. His face was grave. He told me what I already knew. The next step would not be meetings. The next step would be court, and the battlefield would be bigger than I had ever imagined. The first hearing came faster than I expected. Her lawyers filled the room in sharp suits, 5 of them, against me and Ben. Their voices rolled with authority. They cited codes. They cited precedents. They twisted every fact. They painted me as a bitter man who could not accept the law. They called the seizures legitimate. They called the auctions fair. They called the payments legal. I sat and listened. Every word polished, every detail sharp. Their power was real, and the judge leaned forward, listening, measuring, weighed, between truth and law. Then it was our turn. Ben spoke with steady fire. He laid out the timeline. He showed the pattern. He showed how every case followed the same steps. He placed the evidence in front of the judge, and for the first time I saw her pause. Her pen stopped moving. Her eyes narrowed. She asked questions. Real questions. The hearing ended not with dismissal, but with discovery. The judge ordered deeper review, financial records, business communications, internal documents. She wanted the truth beneath the polished surface. For the first time, Catherine Sterling's mask cracked. Just a flicker. But it was there. A shadow of fear. That night I sat in my truck outside the courthouse. Rain pattered against the windshield. I knew what had happened. I had opened the door, and through that door would come light. But I also knew what came next. They would not sit still. They would not let the truth surface without a fight. They would strike harder. They would reach deeper. And they would come for me. The next morning, I found a note slipped into my briefcase. No envelope, no signature, just a name and a number. It was a warning, a clue, and a promise. The fight was far from over. The note in my briefcase carried a single name, Tyler Morrison. Beside it was a number. At first it looked meaningless, but Ben recognized it. A bank account, offshore, hidden, and the name tied straight to Catherine Sterling. We followed the trail. Records showed money flowing in waves, from families losing their land, from auctions that never should have happened, from corporations hiding behind walls of legal language, and every stream of money ended in the same place. Tyler Morrison. He was not just a partner, he was the banker, the keeper of their secrets. I felt the ground shift under me. This was not just one HOA president bending rules. This was a network, a machine stretching across counties, across states, using law as cover, using politics as shield, using fear as weapon. But truth has weight. And the more I gathered it, the heavier it became. Too heavy for them to ignore, too heavy for them to hide. The nights grew darker. The same car sat across the street longer. The same man followed me from courthouse to diner. My phone carried strange echoes. My email filled with threats that looked like junk but smelled like warning. They wanted me to stop. They wanted me to burn the files. They wanted me to vanish into silence. Then the break-in came again. This time they did not just tear photographs. They smashed locks. They scattered my notes. They took copies of evidence I had left in drawers. But they missed one thing. I had already made backups. Every page was stored. Every record was safe. Still, I felt the anger boiling. They were not just fighting for money. They were fighting to erase legacy. They wanted my grandfather's land buried under lies, and I could not allow that. Ben warned me again. He said the deeper we went, the higher the stakes. These people did not fear lawsuits. They feared exposure, and they would do anything to stop it. Anything. Then came Gina Martinez. She had worked inside Pinterest. She had seen the machine from within. Her hands shook when she gave me the envelope. Inside were emails, financial records, plans, focus on properties with aging owners. One email read, "Emotional attachment makes them vulnerable. Limited resources prevent resistance." My chest tightened as I read. This was not random. It was hunting, cold, calculated, predatory. Gina whispered that if they found out she helped me, she would lose everything. Her job, her career, maybe even her freedom. I saw the fear in her eyes, but I also saw the fire. She wanted the truth out, no matter the cost. With her documents, the picture became complete. Catherine was not just a local leader. She was a paid agent of Pinterest. Her role was to identify land, target families, push assessments, then profit when the land was seized. I looked at the numbers again. Over $40 million in value stolen through these schemes. $40 million carved out of families who trusted the system, who trusted leaders like her. The next HOA meeting was a storm before it even began. Word had spread. Neighbors filled the room. Faces tight with anger, hands clutching papers, whispers of fraud moving like wildfire. Catherine stood at the front again, her smile stiff, her voice steady but thin. She tried to speak of progress. She tried to speak of growth. But the crowd cut her off. They wanted answers. They wanted truth. I stood and laid Gina's papers on the table. Emails, bank records, proof of payments tied to Catherine's accounts. The room exploded. People shouted. Some demanded police. Others demanded resignation. The walls shook with outrage. Catherine's mask slipped for good. Her smile died. Her eyes turned cold as stone. She leaned close to the microphone. She spoke words meant only for me. "You are finished. You will lose everything." The crowd heard it. They knew it was no denial. It was threat. And in that moment, the battle lines were drawn clear. From that day forward, it was no longer whispers. It was war. The court hearings grew sharper. Her lawyers attacked every angle. They tried to bury the truth in words and codes. But discovery had been ordered. Documents began to surface, records they did not want anyone to see, payments, transfers, names of officials tied to the scheme. And then came the revelation that shook me hardest. A government official, someone trusted by thousands, someone sworn to serve the people. His name was tied directly to Pinterest accounts. He was not just looking away. He was profiting. It was deeper than I thought, deeper than Ben had warned. This was not only corporate greed, this was political corruption. A web spun to trap entire communities. I sat in my truck that night staring at the files. The rain tapped the windshield like a clock, each drop a reminder that time was running out. They would not let me keep pushing without striking harder. And they did. The surveillance grew bolder, the threats sharper. People I trusted warned me to back away, to let it go, to accept the loss. But I could not. Because this was no longer about one man and one farm. It was about every family who had lost land. It was about legacy, about justice. I walked my fields again that night. The stars burned above me. The soil was damp beneath my boots. I heard my grandfather's words in the wind. "This land is freedom. Do not let anyone take it from you." And I swore once more, I will not stop. Not until the last secret is dragged into the light. Not until justice falls on every hand that stole from the innocent. The fight had begun, and there was no turning back. The first federal agents came quietly. A black sedan outside my driveway. 2 men in plain suits stepping out with careful eyes. They introduced themselves with calm voices. They said they were investigating Pinterest. They asked for my files, my notes, my records. I handed everything over. Boxes of papers, folders stacked high, copies of every email, every receipt, every testimony. I told them this was more than land. This was a system of theft, a system that stretched across states. They nodded. They knew. They had been watching. Agent Martinez told me the truth. The case had grown beyond property law. It was now racketeering. It was conspiracy. It was corruption at the highest levels. The FBI was moving in, and my fight had just become part of something far bigger. The relief I felt was sharp but brief, because with federal eyes came federal enemies. They were desperate now. Desperate. People do desperate things. Tyler Morrison was the key. He was the banker. He was the one who moved their money. Offshore accounts, hidden transfers, dirty trails disguised as clean business. He had all the keys. But he was slipping away. They found him at the airport, bags packed, tickets to Switzerland, cash withdrawals stacked in envelopes. If he escaped, the truth would vanish with him. Every file we built would turn into dust without his testimony, without his access. Agents swarmed him 40 minutes before takeoff. They cuffed him. They pulled him out of the line while travelers stared in confusion. He fought. He shouted. But it was over. The machine had lost its banker. His arrest triggered the storm. Raids erupted across 6 locations. 50 agents moved at once, files seized, computers taken, bank accounts frozen. The empire, Catherine, Sterling built, began to crumble. I watched from the edge. News cameras caught glimpses of mansions raided, of cars towed, of boxes carried out into vans. For years she had smiled while families wept. For years she had spoken of community while stealing their land. And now the world saw her led away in handcuffs. But justice is not fast. Trials take time. Lawyers circle like vultures. Arguments twist and bend. Her team tried everything. They said it was legal. They said it was business. They said owners failed their duties. They painted me as bitter. They painted me as liar. But evidence does not lie. Tyler gave them the rest. Offshore accounts, hidden money, letters between Catherine and officials, plans written in her own hand. It was undeniable. I sat in court watching her face. For the first time, the mask was gone. The perfect smile shattered. She looked small, smaller than the empire she had built, smaller than the fear she had once thrown like knives. The judge read the verdict. Guilty. 25 years. Complete forfeiture of assets. Tyler received 18. 14 others received sentences between 5 and 15. The machine was broken. The empire scattered. I should have felt victory. And in some ways I did. But it came at a cost. 2 years of battles. 2 years of fear. 2 years of looking over my shoulder. My health cracked. My sleep shattered. My peace burned away, yet when I stood on the land again, the same soil my grandfather once tilled, the same fields he once cleared, I felt his presence, his hand on my shoulder, his voice in the wind. This land is freedom. You kept it safe. The acres were mine again, restored. The fences still stood, the barns still held their place, and now they carried scars, scars that told a story of theft, of fight, of justice. The government created a fund with the money taken from Catherine's auctions. 12 million recovered, families compensated, land returned. More than 300 families saw justice. The law finally worked for them. I built a justice center on my land, a place where others could come, a place where they could learn their rights, a place where lawyers could fight without fear, a place where families could find hope before it was too late. The plaque at the gate read simple words, "In memory of those who lost land to greed, in honor of those who fight back." Every year families gather there. We share stories. We light candles. We stand on soil that almost slipped away. And we promise each other the same vow. We will never be silent again. But even with justice won, even with Catherine behind bars, I know the fight is not over. Corporations still circle. Politicians still whisper. There will always be those who see land as profit, who see families as obstacles, who see law as a tool for theft. The battle never truly ends, but neither does resolve. I look over the fields at dawn, the air cool, the grass wet with dew, the horizon stretching wide, and I feel the same truth. My grandfather knew, land is not just soil, land is memory, land is freedom, and freedom is worth fighting for. Always. Everyone thought the fight was over when Catherine Sterling went to prison. Everyone thought the story had reached its end. But corruption does not sleep. Greed does not fade. It waits. It hides. It waits for silence. I began receiving letters. Anonymous. No return address. Inside were warnings, some written in shaky hand, some typed in neat lines. They spoke of other names, other counties, other HOAs, the same schemes, the same theft, the same machine wearing a different mask. At first, I wanted to believe it was exaggeration, rumors, people still afraid. But then I checked the records, and there it was. Properties taken with the same words, special assessments, expedited auctions, owners blindsided, families broken. The FBI had done their part, but the network was larger than one woman, larger than one banker. It had roots that stretched deep into politics, deep into corporations, deep into communities that trusted their leaders. I drove through counties I had never visited before. I spoke with families who thought no one would ever listen. They showed me letters just like mine, papers that carried the same cold phrases, land gone overnight. One man showed me his father's farm. It stood empty now, weeds growing high where crops once stood. the house falling apart. His eyes were hollow. He told me he had begged for help. No one came. He said he watched bulldozers roll in while his father cried on the porch. I carried his story with me, just as I carried the stories of Dorothy Hayes and the Martinez family, each one a scar, each one a wound that refused to heal. At night, I sat in my justice center. Families filled the small rooms, papers spread across tables, voices trembling. They wanted hope, they wanted justice, and I could not turn them away. I started working with lawyers willing to fight. Young ones, brave ones, people who still believed the law could serve the weak. Together we built cases. Together we stood against corporations. Together we reminded families that silence is defeat. But with each step forward, the shadows returned. Strange cars outside again. Unknown numbers calling. My phone, emails laced with threats. I knew the pattern. I had lived it before, and I knew what it meant. The machine was waking again. Ben warned me not to carry too much. He said one man cannot fight the whole world. He said the weight would crush me. He said I had already given enough. But I thought of my grandfather. I thought of his words. This land is freedom. Do not let anyone take it from you. Those words are not just mine. They belong to everyone who holds land passed down by love and sweat. If I stop, who carries them next? So I pushed harder. I spoke at town halls. I spoke at schools. I spoke on radio. I told people to question. I told them to watch their mail. I told them to guard their land. Some listened. Some turned away in fear. But the seed was planted. Then one night, a fire broke out, near the edge of my property. Flames licking at the fence, smoke rising high into the sky. Neighbors came running with buckets and hoses. We fought it back together, and when it was done, I found a small can of fuel tossed in the grass. It was no accident. It was message. They wanted me afraid again, but fear is weaker the second time. I stood in the ashes and felt something else. Resolve. If they wanted me silent, they would have to do more than burn grass. The next week, I received a package. Inside was a copy of a deed, a farm in the next county. It had been seized, sold, transferred. The pattern was identical, and the family who lost it had no lawyer, no voice. They begged me for help. I drove to meet them. An elderly couple, wrinkled hands, tired eyes. They told me they had lived there 50 years. They told me they never missed a tax payment. They showed me the receipts. I saw the pain in their faces, pain I knew too well. I promised them I would fight. I promised them I would not let their story end in silence. Driving back home, I realized something. The battle had grown beyond me, beyond my family, beyond my acres. This was a war for every voice that had been silenced, every family that had been broken, every field that had been stolen. The machine still moved, but now the light was brighter, and light has a way of burning shadows. I stood once more in my fields that night. The stars above, the soil below. I felt the weight of all the stories on my shoulders, heavy, but not crushing. Because weight carried for others is not burden, it is honor, and I swore again. I will keep fighting, until the last acre is safe, until the last family is free, until the last thief is unmasked. Everyone believed the machine was broken. Everyone believed the trial had ended it forever. But greed is like water. It seeps into cracks, it finds new paths, it floods again. I sat in the Justice Center one evening when a young woman walked in. She held a folder close to her chest. Her eyes darted like someone expecting to be followed. She placed the folder on the table and whispered that her family farm had been taken. She said the signatures on the papers were not theirs. She said the notices never came. I opened the folder and my chest tightened. The same language, the same phrases, special assessments, expedited seizure, transfer of title. It was the same. Fraud, wearing new ink. She told me more. She said her uncle worked in a county office. He had overheard names of officials who were part of the same network that once hid behind Catherine. They were still moving land. They were still feeding. Corporations. They had not stopped. I took the papers to Ben. He read them in silence. His face darkened with every page. When he finished, he leaned back and said the words I feared. It never ended. It only moved. The FBI still had cases open. They were still digging into ties across counties. But I knew federal cases take time. Families do not have that time. Land once lost is rarely returned. And that young woman could not wait years for the system to act. So I called a meeting. Neighbors, farmers, families from 3 counties. We gathered in a dusty barn. The air smelled of hay and sweat and fear, but also of resolve. I laid the papers on a wooden table. I told them the truth. The machine still lived. Voices rose. Some shouted in anger, some whispered in fear, some asked what we could even do against such power. I told them power feeds on silence, and silence is choice. We would not be silent. We formed a coalition that night. Not just one man against a corporation. Not just one lawyer against 5. Dozens of families ready to stand. Ready to watch every line in every notice. Ready to question every claim. Ready to fight together. The weeks that followed were tense. Files flowed into my center. Letters, receipts, hidden notices. Everyone carried a story. Everyone pointed to corruption. The network was spreading farther than we imagined, and the shadows returned. Strange calls in the night. Cars waiting too long at stop signs. Neighbors receiving warnings to stay away from me. But instead of fear, it sparked unity. The more they pushed, the closer we stood. Then came the confrontation I could not forget. A man in a suit approached me outside the courthouse. His voice was calm, his words smooth. He told me to step back. He told me to stop speaking. He told me accidents happen. His eyes never blinked. I stood tall. I told him accidents also leave evidence. I told him silence leaves guilt. I told him truth does not break. His jaw tightened. He walked away. And I knew then the war was entering its final stage. More evidence arrived. Tyler Morrison began to talk from prison. He gave the FBI more names, more accounts, more proof of politicians tied to the fraud. The investigation spread wider. The light grew brighter. But the network struck again. Fires broke out in barns across 2 counties. Families lost livestock, fields scorched. Each fire carried the same smell, intimidation, fear. We met again, this time in a school gym. Hundreds of people came. The crowd filled every seat. Families who had never spoken before stood side by side. They wanted truth. They wanted justice. They wanted to show they would not be broken. I spoke that night. My voice carried across the room. I told them the story of my grandfather. I told them of the fields he cleared. I told them of the letter that tried to erase it all. I told them of Catherine, of Tyler, of the trial. And then I told them this: the fight is not mine alone anymore. It belongs to all of us. The gym thundered with applause. Some cried, some shouted, some simply stood in silence. But I saw it, the fire in their eyes, the same fire I carried, the same fire that no intimidation could kill. That night I walked, home under a sky heavy with stars. I thought of every family still waiting for justice. I thought of every acre still at risk. And I knew the truth. The machine was not invincible. It bled when exposed. It crumbled when families stood together. The fight was close to breaking wide open. The storm broke one morning with a call from Agent Martinez. His voice was sharp, his words heavy. He said the files were ready. He said the arrests were coming. He said the end was here. I drove to the courthouse with the box of evidence that started it all. My hands shook on the steering wheel. Not from fear, from weight, from years of carrying the fight, from years of standing against shadows that seemed endless. Crowds had gathered outside, reporters, families, neighbors, people who once doubted, people who once stayed silent. They stood now with signs, with candles, with voices ready to be heard. Inside the courtroom, the air felt thick. The names on trial this time were larger. A state senator, 2 county officials, 3 developers, all tied to the same fraud, all tied to the same machine. Their suits were polished, their eyes cold, but their confidence cracked with every word spoken. The prosecutor laid the story bare. She spoke of families ruined, of land stolen, of lives broken. She showed the transfers, the payments, the plans. She spoke with the weight of truth, and the courtroom listened. I watched them shift in their chairs. Men who once walked with power, now small beneath the gaze of justice. I thought of every family who wept. I thought of every farm lost. I thought of every night I wondered if the fight was too much. And I felt the answer burn in my chest. It was never too much. The verdict came after 3 days. Guilty on every count. Racketeering, conspiracy, fraud, corruption, years in prison, assets seized, accounts frozen. The machine collapsed under the weight of its own greed. The crowd outside erupted. Families embraced. Reporters shouted. Cameras flashed. But I stepped away. I walked into the quiet. I stood beneath the wide sky. And I let the silence wash over me. It was over. Or at least this chapter was over. Because greed will always find cracks. Corruption will always search for silence. The fight never truly ends. But neither does resolve. Neither does hope. Neither does truth. I walked the acres again that evening, the soil dark beneath my boots, the air cool, the wind whispering through the trees. I thought of my grandfather clearing these fields with calloused hands. I thought of his words, "This land is freedom. Do not let anyone take it from you." I touched the fence line, the same fence that once marked the beginning of their theft, and I felt the difference now. It no longer marked loss. It marked victory. It marked endurance. Neighbors began arriving, one by one. Families who fought beside me, families who once thought no one would ever listen. They stood in the grass. They smiled through tears. And together, we lit lanterns that rose into the night sky. Each one a promise, each one a vow. The flames drifted upward, tiny stars against the black. And I whispered the words that carried me through every battle. Land is not just soil. Land is memory. Land is freedom, and freedom is worth every fight. That night, I sat by the old barn. The wood weathered but strong. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not because the world was safe, but because I knew I had done my part. I had carried the fight as far as I could, and now others carried it too. Justice is not a single battle. It is a chain, each link forged by sacrifice, each link held by courage, each link passed on to the next hand. I do not know where the next fight will be. I do not know who will face the next threat. But I know this: they will not stand alone, because the truth has been spoken, and once truth is spoken, it does not die. The land is safe tonight. The stars burn bright. The soil rests in silence, and my grandfather's voice still echoes in the wind. This land is freedom. Do not let anyone take it from you. I never did, and I never will. You've heard this. Confession. Now wait until you hear the next one.